Let's begin here, because too many still confuse kindness with obligation. They believe that love means never saying no. That being a good person means always being available, always saying yes, always picking up the pieces. But a lifetime spent pleasing others can quietly become a life where you no longer recognize yourself. You smile, but it's rehearsed. You give, but it drains you. You say, "I'm fine," though peace hasn't visited in years. This is not compassion. This is the slow erosion of the self. The truth is, you do not owe your life to anyone else's expectations. Not your money, not your time, not your spirit. Because at some point, often later in life, you must choose, will I carry what isn't mine? Or will I finally walk in my own truth? Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. There is a moment in many lives, quiet but piercing, when a person realizes, I've been the strong one for too long, the reliable one, the one who keeps the peace, solves the problems, holds the family together. But deep down, they feel invisible, used, forgotten. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege comes at a cost. Because to become who you truly are, you must stop being who everyone else decided you should be. And for many, that shift begins not with a grand transformation, but with a simple, painful no. No, I won't lend money again. No, I won't fix that relationship. No, I won't change how I live just to keep someone else comfortable. These aren't acts of cruelty. They are acts of return. Return to your own center. Return to the self that was buried beneath years of responsibility. The world often rewards the mask, the persona that smiles and serves and sacrifices. But your soul, it aches for something deeper, something real, something yours. This first part is about recognizing the weight you've carried and daring to ask, was any of it mine to begin with? Because peace, in the end, is not a reward someone gives you. It is a door you learn to close, and a boundary you choose without guilt to keep shut. Let's begin there. There's a moment small and ordinary when a request comes in softly. It sounds reasonable. A quick favor, a little help. And because you care, you say yes. But one yes becomes another, then another, until what once felt kind now feels like a burden you never meant to carry. You begin to wonder when your life became so crowded with things that were never yours. The truth is, most people don't notice when the weight begins to shift. Not at first, because it's disguised in the language of love, family, duty, support. But quietly, slowly, the load becomes heavier than your spirit can bear. Carl Jung often spoke of the unconscious life, the part we live out in patterns we don't see, and this is one of them. The pattern of over-responsibility. The habit of giving beyond your capacity because it's easier than facing the guilt of saying no. And it starts early. When we learn that to be good is to be useful, to be loved is to be needed, to matter is to serve. So we pick up what others drop. We answer calls we don't want to answer. We smile through exhaustion. And somewhere along the way, we begin to confuse our own value with how much we can endure. This is not generosity. It is the erosion of self disguised as virtue. A woman may spend decades in this silent arrangement, saying yes when her body says no, showing up for others even when no one shows up for her, giving from an empty cup, hoping someone will notice she's running on fumes. But often, no one does. Because when you carry other people's loads so well, they forget it wasn't your job in the first place. You become the emotional lifeline, the steady one, the strong one. And what the world calls strength begins to feel like invisibility. You are not unkind. You are not cold. But the truth is, your time, your body, your energy are not limitless resources. They are sacred and they are yours. Jung reminds us that the self, your true self, is not found in the roles you play for others. It emerges when you stop living by expectation and start living by inner truth. But before that awakening can come, something must break. The rope must fray. The smile must falter. The old way must begin to feel unbearable. And for many, that moment of fracture comes quietly. A missed doctor's appointment because you were driving someone else across town. A sleepless night spent worrying about bills that aren't yours. A sudden wave of resentment when your phone lights up with another request. That is the soul's whisper. You've crossed a line, and it's time to come back home. The tragedy is that we often wait until we are exhausted, ill, or emotionally spent before we realize I have nothing left to give because I never paused to receive. And sometimes it takes something symbolic to bring this truth forward. A letter you never meant to open. A mirror that shows the tired eyes of someone you barely recognize. Or a dream where you're packing a suitcase that only holds other people's belongings and nothing of your own. These are not just signs of burnout. They are psychic messages from the self, the part of you that refuses to be erased. The pain you feel when you're asked one more time to help, to fix, to lend, to absorb. That pain is not weakness. It is the breaking point of the false self. And yet many stay silent. Because to stop giving feels like betrayal. To draw a boundary feels like abandonment. To ask for space feels selfish. But the deeper truth is this: you cannot serve others by erasing yourself. You cannot offer peace while living in pieces. There is a kind of sadness that comes from years of unspoken self-sacrifice, a heaviness in the heart, a tension in the shoulders that never goes away, a voice within that keeps asking, when will it be my turn to rest? That voice is not selfish. It is sacred. It is the first sign that your deeper self is waking up. Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that love is always saying yes. But Jung teaches us that love without boundaries is not love, it's fusion. And fusion destroys both the giver and the receiver. It creates dependency instead of respect, obligation instead of intimacy, exhaustion instead of connection. And so, the first fracture is not a failure. It is a message, a signal from the psyche that says something about the way you've been living must now change. You were not meant to be everyone's solution. You were not born to be a permanent lifeline. You were meant to be whole, to be centered, to be sovereign in your own life. But before you can reclaim that life, you must first admit how far you've drifted from it. And that's where the story begins to shift. Not with anger, not with blame, but with the simple, honest truth: I can no longer carry what was never mine. There comes a point when exhaustion is no longer just physical, it becomes spiritual. The weariness seeps into your thoughts, your sleep, your very sense of self. And still, you smile. You keep showing up because that's what's expected. For years, maybe decades, you've worn the mask well. The calm one, the dependable one, the person everyone can count on. That outer image, the persona as Jung called it, became second nature. You became the helper, the fixer, the one who never asks for much. But the truth is behind every selfless role. There is a story no one sees. Beneath the smile, there is a boundary long ignored. Behind the calm voice, there's a quiet scream. And beneath the strong, polished surface, there's a woman whose needs have gone unmet for far too long. The persona was meant to help you belong, to navigate a world that rewards those who give more than they ask for. But somewhere along the way, it became a cage. You were praised for how little you needed, how much you endured, how well you swallowed your truth. But the shadow remembers. It stores the moments when you wanted to say no, but didn't. The times you were taken for granted and stayed silent. The anger you buried so deeply, you forgot it was there until it began to show up in ways you couldn't control. Snapping over small things, waking up tired even after sleep, a sense of bitterness that bubbles up when no one even says thank you. The shadow isn't evil. It's the part of you that holds everything the persona had to hide. And when ignored, it begins to leak out through the cracks. That's why the resentment grows, why the sadness won't leave, why even acts of kindness start to feel like chores. Because deep down, something in you knows you've been pretending for too long. And the pretending has a price. You forget what you want. You forget how to ask. You forget that you're allowed to have limits. Jung taught that the shadow must be made conscious, or it will rule us from within. And so many women find themselves at war with their own lives, performing peace on the outside while carrying chaos on the inside. You say yes and feel yourself shrink. You agree and feel your body tighten. You help again and feel the sharp echo of being used even if no one says it aloud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as standing in the kitchen, your hand on the counter, thinking, I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't know how to stop. That's the fracture between the mask and the self, the place where the persona and the shadow finally meet. And it's disorienting, because the very traits you were once proud of, being generous, being helpful, being strong, start to feel like traps. You begin to see the pattern, how you were praised when you gave everything, but dismissed when you needed something. How being easy to love really meant being easy to use. And that realization stings, because it asks you to question your entire identity. Not just what you've done, but who you've become to survive. You remember the younger version of yourself, the one who had dreams, preferences, even the occasional selfish thought. But over time, those parts were tucked away in favor of what others needed. The giving became automatic, the self-sacrifice expected, and slowly, quietly, the real self was lost in the roles. But the psyche doesn't forget. It keeps a quiet record, and eventually it speaks through restlessness, through resentment, through the aching sense that something in your life isn't truly yours anymore. This is the moment where many feel trapped. Because if you stop performing, who are you? If you start saying no, will they leave? If you show your true feelings, will anyone stay? It's terrifying. And yet it's also a turning point, because only when the mask begins to crack can the true face begin to emerge. Only when the shadow is acknowledged can healing begin. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self. Not just the good, not just the generous, but the angry, the exhausted, the forgotten. To live a life that feels real, you must reclaim the parts you were told to hide. And here's the difficult truth. The world may not reward you for that. Some people will pull away. Some will guilt you. Some will call you selfish. But those who truly love you, they will stay. They will learn. They will grow with you. Because individuation is not a rejection of others. It's a return to the self, a refusal to betray your own soul for the comfort of the crowd. And yes, it takes courage, but it also brings clarity. You start to see who really respects you and who only stayed because your boundaries were soft. You start to feel your own energy again, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or approval. And you start to believe, maybe for the first time, that you are allowed to matter, even when you say no. So, if the smile feels heavy, if the favors feel hollow, if you catch yourself acting instead of living, pay attention. Because the shadow is not your enemy. It is your signal. The doorway to a life where you no longer have to perform to be loved. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to apologize for limits. You don't have to become smaller to fit into other people's comfort. This is the moment where truth begins, where the old mask becomes too tight and the soul begins to breathe again. Let that breath guide you forward. When the mask begins to crack, something remarkable takes place. At first, it feels like loss, a loss of certainty of belonging of the role you once played so well. But underneath the fear, a new possibility begins to stir. It is the quiet awakening of the self, not the borrowed self that lived for approval, but the deeper truth that has always been there, waiting, patient, unbroken. This awakening rarely arrives with fireworks. It comes in moments of stillness, often when you least expect it. A morning where you look in the mirror and for the first time refuse to hide your tired eyes. An afternoon when you hear yourself say no without apology. An evening when you realize you no longer have to perform to be worthy of love. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, and it always begins here when the shadow you once denied steps into the light. Suddenly, you see that the anger you carried was not a flaw, but a messenger. The resentment was not cruelty, but a signal that your boundaries had been crossed. Even your fatigue, the heaviness in your body, was a truth teller. Every symptom was the psyche's way of saying you were living too far from yourself. And so, the awakening begins with recognition. A recognition that the life you've lived until now was shaped not only by love, but also by fear. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of rejection. Fear of being called selfish. But fear is not the same as love, and it cannot be the foundation for a soul that longs to be free. Awakening feels like standing at a doorway. Behind you is the familiar endless giving, endless performance, endless exhaustion. Before you is the unknown, uncertain but alive with the possibility of peace. The choice to step forward may shake your hands and weaken your knees, but the door does not disappear. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Many describe this stage as a deep inner reframe. What once felt like duty now feels like burden. What once felt like kindness now feels like self-erasure, and what once felt impossible, choosing yourself, suddenly begins to look like the only path that makes sense. This is the gift of the shadow. By confronting what you hid, you discover what you need. You learn that limits are not rejection, but protection. You see that peace is not selfish, but sacred. And you begin to understand that the soul does not thrive by pleasing. It thrives by living in truth. In this awakening, you may notice symbols appearing in your dreams, your reflections, your quiet thoughts. A locked room you never entered now opening. A heavy coat suddenly slipping off your shoulders. A bird in a cage realizing the door has been open all along. These are not random images. They are the psyche's language offering you guidance. The self speaks in symbols, showing you that freedom is not out there in someone else's approval. It is in here waiting to be claimed. And with that realization comes relief. A breath you didn't know you were holding. The slow return of your own voice, your own rhythm, your own energy. You begin to trust your instincts again instead of silencing them. You begin to honor your feelings instead of dismissing them. You begin to remember what brings you joy, not just what keeps the peace. Jung reminded us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Awakening is precisely this shining light on what was hidden, so that you no longer live by compulsion, but by choice. It is the turning point where the story stops being about survival and begins to be about truth. And though it feels like a solitary journey, you are not alone in it. Every soul that has ever longed for authenticity walks this same path. The landscapes differ, but the inner work is the same. It is the work of peeling away what is false, so that what is real can finally breathe. This awakening does not mean you stop loving others. On the contrary, it deepens your love. Because love that comes from truth is stronger than love that comes from fear. It is not needy. It is not manipulative. It does not demand that you betray yourself to prove your care. Instead, it flows from overflow, not emptiness. It blesses others without breaking you. And so the awakening is not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a life lived not for performance, but for presence. Not for survival, but for wholeness. Not for their approval, but for your soul. This is the point in the journey where you no longer ask, "What will they think of me?" Instead, you ask, "What is true for me?" And in that simple shift, a whole new world begins to take shape. It is the world of individuation, the world of living aligned with your own center, the world where you close the old door of exhaustion and step through the new one marked peace. Let the awakening be the first breath of that world, and let it remind you that even after years of self-forgetting, the self never forgets you. It waits, it whispers, and when you are ready, it opens the door. Awakening always leads to a choice. Once you see the door to peace, you cannot unsee it. But stepping through requires something most people avoid for a lifetime, drawing a boundary that is clear, firm, and alive with consequence. Boundaries are not walls of stone. They are living lines drawn in the sand of the soul, saying this is mine and that is yours. Without them, love collapses into control. With them, love becomes respect. This is where transformation takes shape. It is not enough to recognize the pattern. You must interrupt it. An interruption begins with the small but decisive word, no. No to lending money when it threatens your own security. No to fixing family conflicts that were never yours to resolve. To bending your life just to keep someone else comfortable. These refusals are not acts of coldness. They are acts of self-respect. Jung wrote that what we resist persists, and nowhere is this truer than with unspoken boundaries. The more you ignore your limits, the more others will press against them. The more you silently endure, the more invisible you become. But the moment you speak with clarity, the pattern begins to dissolve. Consider how it feels to say no without apology. At first, there may be guilt. The old persona whispers that you are selfish, ungrateful, or unkind. But stay with the discomfort. It is only the residue of years spent living for approval, because something remarkable follows relief. Relief in your body, your breath, your very heartbeat. The nervous system quiets. The muscles loosen. You realize that peace is not earned by sacrifice. It is preserved by boundaries. And yes, there will be consequences. Some will resist your new stance. They may pout, manipulate, or retreat. But this too is a revelation. It shows who valued you for your essence and who valued only your compliance. When you set a boundary, you discover the truth of relationships. Some grow deeper, built on mutual respect. Others wither, unable to survive without the old imbalance. Both outcomes are gifts. Both bring you closer to the life that is truly yours. Symbolically, boundaries are thresholds. Every no is a closed door behind you, and every yes to yourself is a door opening ahead. You are no longer trapped in the narrow corridor of other people's demands. You are walking into the wide landscape of your own life. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is alignment. The shadow has spoken. The persona has loosened, and the self now asks you to live in truth, to speak with the voice you once hid, to stand with the strength you once gave away. The first time you say, "I cannot do that," something shifts in the psyche. The child within you, once silenced, hears a promise, "I will not abandon you again." The adult within you, once exhausted, feels restored. I will guard your peace as carefully as your breath. And the world notices you carry yourself differently. You enter rooms with quiet confidence. Your presence says what your words need not repeat. I am no longer available for what drains me. This transformation is not about pushing others away. It is about calling yourself back. It is about remembering that peace is not negotiable and that dignity does not depend on permission. Boundaries once set begin to ripple outward. They shape how you spend your days, how you use your energy, and how you relate to others. They turn scattered exhaustion into steady presence. They turn silent resentment into honest clarity. They turn the fragmented self into a whole one. Jungian psychology tells us that individuation is not a theory, but a lived process. Each choice becomes a step into greater wholeness. Each refusal to betray yourself becomes an affirmation of life. Each line you draw becomes a bridge to the self. And so transformation is not sudden. It is steady. It grows with each decision to live in alignment with your own center. You begin to taste freedom in small doses, an evening to yourself. Money saved for your own needs. Rest taken without apology. What once felt impossible now feels natural. What once filled you with fear now fills you with relief. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the life that was drowning in demands begins to breathe again. Boundaries are not the end of love. They are the beginning of authentic love. Love that does not consume, but respects. Love that does not demand, but honors. Love that allows two souls to stand side by side whole and unbroken. So the choice is here. Not a choice between love and self, but a choice to live a love that includes the self. A love that no longer sacrifices peace as its price. This is the heart of transformation. To look at the patterns of a lifetime and instead of repeating them, to say here, the cycle ends. Here I draw the line. Here I begin again. And in that choice, the story turns from survival to sovereignty, from pleasing to peace, from shadow to wholeness. Let this be the threshold you do not step back from. Let this be the new beginning your soul has long awaited. Every journey reaches its turning point and then its quiet close. The path we have traced together began with exhaustion deepened through fracture and unfolded into awakening. And now, the work is to gather these truths and live them. At this stage, the lesson is no longer hidden. You see clearly that peace cannot be borrowed, begged, or bartered away. It is yours to guard. It is yours to honor. And it is yours to protect without apology. The shadow has spoken its truth. The persona has loosened its grip. And the self steady and enduring rises to its rightful place at the center of your life. What once felt like selfishness now reveals itself as self-respect. What once felt like duty now shows itself as chains. And what once felt like fear begins to fade in the presence of clarity. Carl Jung often reminded us that wholeness is not perfection, it is integration. To become whole is to welcome every part of yourself, even those you once tried to silence. The anger that said enough, the sadness that longed for rest, the joy that waited patiently to be remembered. When you honor these voices, you no longer live divided. You no longer sacrifice peace just to keep appearances. Instead, you begin to live in alignment with boundaries that protect with choices, that nourish with love, that does not erase. And this is the quiet victory of individuation. Not the applause of others, but the inner calm of a life that belongs to you. Not endless giving that leaves you empty, but balanced love that flows from fullness. Think of it as a homecoming. The house of your soul once felt crowded with guests, each demanding a room, a service, a sacrifice. But now you stand at the doorway with new authority. You decide who enters. You decide who stays. And you finally claim the quiet room that was always meant for you. This is not about pushing others away. It is about letting love return to its true form. Love that honors rather than consumes. Love that deepens rather than drains. Love that grows stronger because it does not demand the erasure of the self. At this point, you may notice a different rhythm in your life. Fewer interruptions, calmer mornings, evenings that feel like yours again, conversations marked not by resentment, but by clarity. And within you, a steadiness that cannot be shaken by every request or guilt-laden word. You may even look back on the years of self-sacrifice with a kind of compassion. You did what you knew. You played the role you were taught. But now, you live with the awareness that you have the right to change the script. The future does not need to be written by old patterns. It can be shaped by the soul that is awakened by the self, that is returned by the peace you are no longer willing to surrender. Remember, this individuation is not a single act, but a lifelong unfolding. Each day, you choose truth over performance. You walk deeper into wholeness. Each time you honor your limits, you step closer to freedom. And each time you protect your peace, you affirm the worth of your life. Symbolically, it is as if you once lived under dim light, always flickering, always uncertain. But now you carry your own lamp. It shines steadily, not to blind or dazzle, but to guide your steps with quiet assurance. This is the light of the self, unmistakable, unwavering, unborrowed. And so let this closing be a blessing, a reminder that your peace is priceless, that your worth does not depend on how much you carry for others, that love does not require self-erasure but self-presence. The door to this truth is always near. When you feel the old habits return, remember the image of the rope fraying the mask, cracking the door opening. These are not failures, they are signals. Signals that you are being called back to yourself once more. In the end, the most powerful choice is simple: to live in alignment with what brings you calm. To stay true to the self that was never lost, only waiting. And to know that individuation is not the end of love, it is the foundation for love that endures. So walk forward now, with peace as your compass. Guard your boundaries as sacred ground. And remember, in the words of Jung, that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Before you go, I invite you to pause and reflect. Which part of this journey speaks most deeply to you? Have you felt the weight of old expectations and the relief of letting them go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice may be the mirror someone else needs tonight. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for choosing this path of inner truth. May the peace you seek be the peace you live, and may your soul rest intact.